It makes sense that parallel capacitance is parasitic capacitance and is effectively analogous or equivalent to magnetic remnants and also analogous to a coupling coefficient, a magnetic coupling above unity. When we consider that the parasitic capacitance between the turns of windings on a coil or between two coils on a transformer situation, if the parasitic capacitance between them increases, then that translates into the distance between the windings are getting closer and closer together. They're more tightly packed, and that entails an analogy to their coupling, their magnetic coupling. It starts going up. So suggesting a magnetic coupling above unity is suggesting a coupling between the turns of winding between two coils on a transformer situation so close that they exceed standard conventional models of construction of a transformer. Yet Tesla envisioned a very different style of transformer construction in which the core material, first of all, is solid iron. It's not a matrix of powdered iron and glue to kill eddy currents. Instead, we're trying to encourage eddy currents, and now we want to extend them outside the mass of the core into a larger body of ferromagnetic material that's even larger than the core material in terms of mass. And in order to do that, you have to extend the core by magnetic coupling it to a larger mass outside the core, because the inner diameter of the coils of winding, it can only take so much dimensionality of how much material you put in there, core material. So you magnetically couple it to a larger mass outside the core. And that gives you a kind of flywheel, a magnetic flywheel, a magnetic momentum, which is the way I look at magnetic remnants. It's a form of momentum. And you don't change your energy input. You simply change the geometry of the core material. You enlarge it. You increase its mass. And as Tesla said, for every 200 pounds of iron added to a special generator, 1 horsepower was increased at its output, because the momentum is increasing. So it doesn't take more energy to increase momentum in this case, in the case of magnetic remnants. All it takes is more mass of ferromagnetic material becoming magnetized by the 2 or more coils that are transferring energy in a transformer situation. So when that magnetic remnants goes up, it's effectively saying to us that the coupling between the windings are going up, which is effectively saying they're coming closer together. And apparently, at some point, the equivalency of magnetic coupling goes above unity when a certain critical point, turning point, is reached, in which the mass of the ferromagnetic material reaches a certain point of increase. And that, of course, increases parallel capacitance, which is called parasitic, in order to make it sound bad for you to stay away from it. Because you don't want over-unity, you don't want ringing, you don't want resonant rise, because then you'll destroy your equipment. That's an interesting way they put it. They never say over-unity, they just say, oh, you'll destroy your equipment. When I'm reading these articles on parasitic capacitance, it's very fascinating. Especially, see, I was looking at what the simulator was telling me, parallel capacitance, and I had to find out what is the equivalent version of parallel capacitance in the real world. And then I found a question on Stack Exchange in which the fellow asks, why is parasitic capacitance always depicted in an inductor as parallel capacitance? And the guy who answered gave his logical answer, and that confirmed for me at least one instance of how to interpret parallel capacitance in a simulator environment, What is it in the real world environment? It's the parasitic capacitance between the turns of windings on a coil. Now, they didn't say a transformer, but when I look for over unity, I see it exhibiting only when the coil in question is at a minimum of 10 millihenries or above. Can't be below, can't be 1 millihenry. And otherwise, the voltage in the amps gets suppressed to zero. So in order for them to magnify or even exist at all, but if they do exist, they will magnify, is to raise the minimum inductance to 10 millihenries. And then the coupling coefficient between the coils, I had them in pairs, so I didn't have more than 2 coils on each transformer situation. It didn't have to be anything ludicrous. I made it 60%. In fact, reducing it, I think, increases the effect. But I thought, well, I'll just keep it at 60%. 0.01% coupling, it's like, wow, this is pretty good. Which verifies how the Amman brothers transferred energy from their power supply to their motor. They did not electrically connect the two. They had a range of influence of several miles. I forget the figure. It's on the transcription on a web of the newspaper article. Or no, it was a story told by the guy who inspired the demonstration to occur. I think he was a handyman who came to do some fix-ups in the Amman brother house, Cyril Amman's house. And this was prior, and he gave him the idea to do the demonstration in Denver. You should share this with people. This is pretty cool. And what he showed the handyman was that all he had to do was lay down some rebar, iron rebar on the table, throw a copper coil onto it, and the coil was an open coil. And so it was laying against the rebar, and the coil started to exhibit a potential between its two terminals. And all you had to do is connect the two terminals to a bell, and the bell rung with quite a spark when they connected it, showing that there was a large potential on that coil. And he said all you had to do was have the power supply somewhere nearby. He had it either in his attic or in his basement, I forget which. I think it was the attic. And the handyman was looking to see what's going on in the mains, because I guess he was trying to plug into the outlet, and there was no power in the outlet, and went to the mains box, the fuse box, and found that the connection to the grid had been severed. So the house was not even connected to the grid. Anywho, so it was several miles, they said in that article. I no more than 2 dozen, something less than up to 2 dozen at the most. But still, even if it was 6 miles, that's pretty cool. To have a power supply supplying power for your neighbors without even having to electrically connect to them. But this is how I can see why this is possible, because it's unprecedented in scientific literature, this idea that you can broadcast power and not have to do it with Tesla's magnifying transmitter through the bedrock. You're simply doing it just like you do an AM radio broadcast, but you don't have this huge aerial, mast going up hundreds of feet high off the ground. You simply have your transformer winding, and it has to be done similar to Nathan Stubblefield's methodology, in which you wrapped your primary and your secondary. In his case, was one was copper sheathed with cotton insulation, and the other was bare iron wires. So it's basically, he had a third winding that was his power. He took off the power, and that was copper. But between the two primary windings, they're effectively Oliver Heaviside solution to the transatlantic telegraph cable in the 1880s, in which you take the telegraph cable that's insulated copper core, and it's been wrapped with bare iron wire or bare iron ribbon, and then the whole thing insulated, and you wrap it up into a transformer situation around a ferromagnetic core. And you basically have Nathan Stubblefield's electric battery, which he wanted to call an electric generator because he was extracting magnetic force from the Earth, but the patent office wouldn't allow him to call it that, so he had to call it an electric battery. Um, well, this is effectively the same kind of ideology, the line of reasoning that's taking place about 40 years later in 1921, or prior, 30 to 40 years later, because C.R. Lamont said it took him 7 years to develop this technique. And he claimed he was getting the energy from the atmosphere, but I know it to be nothing. He's getting a stimulus from the environment. And the ambient stimulus for a crystal radio set from the 1920s with a whip antenna 1 yard long was in the range of about 5 microvolts. So I always set my input to 1 microvolt of a precharged capacitor. And that's what I did in this experiment, the latest experiment I posted on Quora in Electrical Sciences space, was a variation on Byron Brubaker's hairpin circuit, in which I took out his AC input and put in a precharged capacitor. And then I had to locate where to put the load. And it wasn't in the same place where Byron had his voltage multiplier leading to a load. I had to put it on the opposite end of the circuit, as far away from the diode bridge as possible. And it worked. It worked just, but then I had to raise the rotor of the rotor-stator pair to a minimum of 10 millihenries for it to exhibit power consistently over time. And then I discovered that something I had overlooked, because I didn't have power there before, was that, so I didn't overlook it, I just didn't have it to be seen, was that the rotor was generating power, because the volts and amps were out of phase by half a cycle of oscillation, while the stator was not. The stator was consuming and converting power because it was in total alignment, the amps with the volts. And they were triangle waves, of all things. They're not even oscillating sine waves. I don't know how well you can rotate a rotor with triangle waves, but in any case, that's what was being exhibited on both the rotor and the stator. I didn't bother to look at anything else in the circuit because I wasn't interested. I just wanted to look at the rotor to see if I was getting over unity. And I ended up looking at both the rotor and the stator. Anywho, so I'm trying to understand this phenomenon of parallel capacitance, because I suspect it's the same as magnetic resonance, because I suspect that that's how Paul Falstad managed to create an idealistic transformer in his simulator, was because he was using core materials similar to a perpetual motion holder experiment, in which you put in a DC pulse from a battery and it holds onto it perpetually until you do anything to alter that condition. And this is similar to computer core memory utilized between the years of 1955 and 1975. They use this principle of magnetic resonance to store bits of data, ones and zeros, depending on which direction the magnetic resonance was oriented in a tiny ferrite ring magnet. And they made them smaller and smaller to shrink down, because all you need is the memory. You don't need the force. And it's either a 1 or a 0, so they could fit more memory in the given space by shrinking everything down. Of course, they still do that. But in our case, we want power, and so we want to increase the mass, not diminish it. So we want to increase this, the mass that is holding on to the magnetic resonance. But I can see logistically or ideologically how it works with parasitic capacitance, how the two work. I suspected it, and now I can see verification. So I guess that's it. Tesla was right when he said for every 200 pounds of iron added to a special generator, 1 horsepower was increased. And that was because the core of his horseshoe magnets, the M coils, the two of them, the feet were facing each other. The core was bolted, magnetically coupled to the floor of the battery room in some of the electro U-boats from the Nazi German World War II era that were outfitted with Tesla's special generator running on compressed air stored in liquefied air tanks. So it's obvious that's a massive amount of iron in the hull of a U-boat that's contributing to the operation of his DC generator that see, so the magnetic resonance, it has, well, in his case, his special generator was a DC generator, but when I took Byron's thing and modified it, it's AC. It oscillates. It's not DC. So it doesn't matter what situation you're in. It's just Tesla's situation. It appears to be a DC system, but I could be wrong because of the reciprocating action of the rod in between the feet of the two opposing horseshoe magnets might have turned DC of the M coils into AC of the H coils. I don't know. So I don't know what the outcome of that was. But in any case, we have to use these things from history because we have so little to go on to try to understand these principles of electricity that are not commonly known. They're not very, very rarely known at all. And I'm trying to grapple and grope with this as best I can, but it looks like there's enough evidence to piece these things together and become more self-assured about how the Amman brothers went about doing what they did. Now, how Tesla did his 1931 Pierce Arrow experiment, God knows. Certainly more efficient than what the Amman brothers were doing, but possibly along the same lines of reasoning, but not the same as his prior EV conversion of 1897, according to Arthur Matthews. That was a different style altogether. But I've already covered that years ago, so I don't have to go back there again. I'm just trying to figure out the Amman brothers because I'm so taken by it. And they said it was scalable. So it sounds like it's regulatable. You know, if it's scalable, it's regulatable. That's what they're implying. And regulatability is the hardest thing I've found to do in an over-unity situation because I keep studying the explosive variety of electrical reactants giving over-unity. So it's nice to know that something is regulatable, which makes it practical. Anywho.